diversification in your property portfolio. Why is that so important for you getting to financial freedom much faster? Look, when you invest in property, it's a long-term game. It is a 5-year, 7-year, 10-year plan, right? But if you want to shorten that, or you think you can shorten that by 2 or 3 years, wouldn't you want to? Well, that's why the key to it is diversification. And so many people don't realize that. So let's get started and talk about it, right? So what is diversification? It is about having different types of properties in different areas, in different states around Australia. So you minimize the risk of your portfolio and you maximize the growth potential and the cash flow potential of your portfolio. Why is that important? Well, when you have diversification, you're meant to have a good balance of growth and cash flow so that you can play off each other so that you can continue to grow your portfolio. The worst thing that can happen when you are investing in property is to be told that you can no longer service, you sit by the sidelines for 2, 3, 5 years, right? Because your income's not growing. If your income's not growing, you're not able to refinance. And if you're not able to refinance, therefore you're not able to buy any more properties. And the worst thing is you cannot make up for lost capital gains and lost cash flow. And that is the fundamentals of diversification, right? So take us back in 2020 when the world has seen COVID. Between 2020 and 2023 or 2022, let's call it, in those 2 years, each city, and in fact certain suburbs in the cities around Australia behave differently and their property portfolios changed, right? We've seen a lot of my clients who've invested out of their own state and have benefited from it. Let's talk about that. So when we saw Melbourne had the harshest lockdown, and when Melbourne had the harshest lockdown, what happened to their real estate? It tanked. Whether your residential was struggling to be sold and the value was staying stagnant, right? Commercial properties were being shut down and there was no more cash flow, right? The country had one of the biggest and the harshest lockdowns in around the world for 2 years. So the property market came to a bottom and it halted everything. Now, if you had all of your property portfolio in Victoria or Melbourne, you would have been dramatically affected. You would have probably halved the value of your property and gone to almost zero cash flow, right? Now, look at what happened to Brisbane, Gold Coast, and around the areas of Queensland. Not only North Queensland, but just the first central Queensland, when we're looking at, your Gold Coast to your Sunshine Coast Strip. What happened to that? They were one of the first progressive peoples to lock down the border but open everything else. And because their activities open internally, they were able to generate activities internally, which meant that their shops continue to open, their lifestyle choices continue to grow, which means that people were doing biking, people were doing fishing, people were doing Pilates, yoga, fitness, people accessing coffee shops, eateries. Things started to progress. So in some ways, Brisbane, Gold Coast, Sunshine was 12 months ahead in its economical state in compared to Melbourne, and their property prices value went up. The rents went up because people wanted to move into those areas, right? And the value went up, right? So if you had Melbourne properties, you wouldn't be able to refinance. In fact, you had to start to sell off some to support the rest of your portfolio. Now, if you diversified and had some properties in Brisbane or Gold Coast, you would have seen some of the properties go up by 30 to 40% during the COVID 2 years when Melbourne was going down by 30 to 40%. If you had properties on both sides, you could have supported your Melbourne property by refinancing or getting more cash flow from your Brisbane or Gold Coast properties to support that. And you would have been able to capitalize on the growth of that, refinance, and potentially buy undervalued properties in Melbourne. And that's the key to diversification. It doesn't matter whether you're doing property in residential or commercial, that is the key, right? And then let's talk about Sydney, New South Wales. What's happened? We were probably in the middle, right? Now, we've had lockdowns, but our property value continued to grow because we still had the demand from overseas. Now, even though we had no overseas in terms of migrants, we still had overseas money that was brewing underneath in the Sydney, New South Wales market, because New South Wales and Sydney is one of the highest, the first choice for all migrants. And so therefore we had that money and people were going out and maintaining our property prices by continue to buy, right? So we saw both commercial and residential move up and grow in value despite the fact that the rents were being dampened because of the mandate of halving your rent and giving rent relief and everything else, right? But the value continued to grow. And that's fundamentally different behaviors. Then we move over to somewhere like Perth. Perth was completely shut off from the rest of the world. It was shut off from the rest of the world purely because it was treated as an in-state and was so far away. It operated by itself, it maintained itself, and we started to see growth in that area because it was able to self-sustain, right? It self-sustained, it behaved like Brisbane, it was like Brisbane, but it also had much smaller growth because it had a much smaller population, right? Because most of WA's dependency is on the eastern seaboard and people coming over and working and spending and being there, right? And people were getting higher wages. wages. So we saw some wage stagnation in W, but we also saw that property was maintaining quite good stability. Not the growth you saw in Brisbane or in Sydney, but not the downward trajectory of Victoria, but we saw it holding still because ultimately it really has only about 1 million people, right? Compared to 5 million in Sydney and similar in Melbourne, right? And then you look at all the other states, right? In your Northern Territories and there's South Australia. South Australia was pretty much in this area where it was sort of undervalued. People were missing it, right? Until after COVID. Then people started to put money in. It was deemed an area for international students to come in and it started to get that exponential spurt, right? Of course, Tassie, a lot of people from Melbourne moved to Tassie. That gave them its natural spurt. Northern Territory, it's really Northern Territories. It's a very, very hard market. And personally, I wouldn't invest there because the commercial space is so small and it's got a huge Aboriginal community and a lot of people are fly in, fly outs, right? But if you're looking at the eastern seaboards and the western seaboards in terms of WA and Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, you've got to see that diversification is the key to your portfolio. And the reason you want that is you want commercial, you want residential, you want the two to combine together because residential gives you growth. It gives you growth, but it's not meant to give you cash flow. It gives you $50 or $100. So what? You paid it off and it gives you 2% return. So friggin' what? That 2% could be a 6% if you put that into commercial property. So commercial property is based on cash flow. You will still have growth, but growth is secondary. Cash flow is first. Stability, cash flow, great for retirement. Now, when you interplay the two of them, that allows you to have a really balanced portfolio where your cash flow and growth together, right? Cash flow and growth together allows you to grow and grow and grow and grow and move you through that different stages. So no matter where you are, you're either going to pick up on more cash flow or more growth, right? And that's why it's so important. Then from there, what happens is then you go and have these properties, commercial and resident, in different parts of Australia. So you buy some in Queensland, buy some in regional Queensland because it's going to give you higher cash flow but lower growth. Buy something in central Queensland where you're going to have higher growth but maybe less cash flow. Buy something in Melbourne because it's underperforming, undervalued at the moment, no confidence, that's going to bounce back. Buy something South Australia because it's that area that's next predicted to boom. Your ACT because of the stability of the government tenancy. You go into Sydney, which is going to give you your highest growth, right? If you balance your portfolio out, no matter what's happening in the different states, this is where you're going to pick up. Where you're going to find states with growth as the times change, you can use the cash flow from one of the other properties to support drawing down on the equity of that growth in that particular property. Then if one area is getting devalued or going down, you know you can grab the growth from a different portfolio and refinance, have a deposit buy into areas that are becoming undervalued. There's always going to be a city, a state that is going to be underperforming at any one time in the property market, whether that's commercial or residential. Sometimes commercial residential can be two different states, and that's where you get the key to keep buying in different states as each area becomes underperforming and other areas gets to boom. Certain areas will get rents put up faster. So for example, we're seeing Brisbane, Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, their rents are moving much faster than Melbourne, even parts of Sydney. So that means that when the rents move up, you're going to have more cash flow, instant cash flow in your pocket. When you get that instant cash flow in your pocket, then what happens is you use that cash flow, refinance that property, a different property, maybe going through boom, and then buy in the undervalued area. So for example, right now, if you had property in Sydney, which would had its growth, you have cash flow that's changing in Queensland. You could use the cash flow from a property in Queensland to support the drawdown of equity in the property in Sydney, and then using that money buy into Melbourne or South Australia and be sitting there waiting for that to boom in the next 2 to 3 years. Now that's a fantastic strat. That is going to get you wealthier faster. It's all about making money together and creating wealth together, right? That is what the Unikorn motto is about. That's what Helen Tarrant is about. If you want to find out how you can build that sustainable, diverse portfolio, reach out to us, click below, join us for one of our events, booking for a strategy session, and let us help you build a cash flow rich portfolio through property.